What's that? You're here to see what I bought at Rhinebeck? Oh, well, I mean, I'm so sorry to disappoint you, but I didn't buy anything. Not a single skein, not a single hank. Yeah, okay, who am I kidding? Settle in, Pickles. This is going to be a long one. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as Dunderknit. I'm a knitter living in London, and if this is your first time joining us on the podcast, a massive hello and welcome to you. I am still reasonably new to this whole podcasting malarkey, but I appreciate now being on episode 5, it's a little bit more of a commitment to go all the way back and start at the very beginning before you've established whether or not this whole thing is your cup of tea. And therefore, by all means join us, and if you like what you see, wink wink, then you're more than welcome to go all the way back to the start to follow along and understand a little bit more both about me and the premise of the podcast itself. Again, as usual, one thing to flag up front is this is a swearing friendly podcast, and therefore perhaps if you're watching this podcast with children or if swearing is just not your cup of tea, I really appreciate you trying us out, but this is probably not going to be the podcast for you. I'm quite a sweary person naturally, and I'm going to be using my natural language from here on out, and therefore, if that's not your bag, as I say, I appreciate it, but probably not for you. Okay? We good? Holy shit. I sort of don't even know where to start with all of this. I'm going to crack on and we'll see how we go. It's been 2 weeks since my last podcast, and I don't really know where to start with this. I understand what people mean when they say that they're out of practice with it all, but let's try it and see how we go. First things first. As is always the way with travelling and planes and germs and people, I have come back from the US with an absolute stinking cold. I'm a lot more nasal than usual and snotty. I'm quite a bit huskier than usual as well, although some people might like that sort of thing. And it just means that, if I'm gonna try and enunciate as clearly for you as I can, but if my M's turn into B's at some point, please do forgive me. And as usual, I'll be putting everything that I talk about down below in the show notes and over on Ravelry, so you don't get too carried away searching for that new dye or battling tosh that you've heard all that stuff about. So as you may know, I filmed episodes 3 and 4 back to back a couple of weeks ago to make sure that I had some content and an episode to post for you while I was over in the US in the last few weeks. And while I was filming that, I took a break between episodes 3 and 4 just to check YouTube to see some of the questions that you might have asked me there. And I spotted that literally as I'd been filming episode 3, we'd hit 1,000 YouTube subscribers. Which is, to coin a phrase, in-fucking-sane. And then I come back and I check on the channel and I realise we're just a hair short of having 2,800 subscribers. I've got nothing, if I'm honest. I'm baffled and grateful and thankful and kind of overwhelmed and delighted that there are so many of you out there who seem to want to follow along with this hot mess. So essentially, yes, I'm still trying to get my head around a lot of this, but between this and the myriad of comments I've had and messages over on Instagram for those of you who were following my trip to the US, to those of you who've been posting in the Ravelry threads, a massive special thank you to Susan as well for opening the episode 4 thread, which I completely forgot about while I was away. You were the best. Thank you, Susan. That was brilliant. But yeah, to those of you who've just been following along, who are coming back again, I so appreciate it, and I'm just incredibly grateful for your time and your kindness and generosity, and delighted to have a chance to chat and hopefully make you smile. As ever, a big thank you too to those of you who have commented and signposted how and where you found out about this podcast. I really do appreciate it. I also want to take the time to thank individuals who have perhaps watched this podcast in the first instance and then gone on to recommend it through their own channels. As ever, I really do appreciate it. I will say it's been a couple of weeks, and because of that, I may well have missed a few people in this. If you wouldn't mind either commenting on this week's episode or elsewhere, whether it be in the Ravelry group or over on Instagram, I would really appreciate it. As I say, I like to take the time just to say thank you, but I'm conscious that given the length of time that I've taken away and the fact that my mobile connectivity was somewhat intermittent, there may be a few people that I've missed, and so my hugest apologies for that. But as a quick rundown, I know that first of all, LÆRKE of the Fibre Tales podcast mentioned my stalactite sweater in a section on her episode earlier on this month. LÆRKE's podcast is so gentle and so soothing, not just in terms of the way that she kind of presents herself and talks around her projects, but even just some of the snippets of her life that she shows there are so just soothing for the soul. It is wonderful. She's also just launched a new cardigan pattern, which is absolutely stunning. I know that her Retour sweater has been on my Vicarious knitting list for quite a while, and so I really would recommend that you pop over and check her out. A huge thank you too to Grace of the BABBLES Travelling Yarns podcast. Grace mentioned my stag head sweater alongside another sweater that she's been working on with a sort of stag head antler-like motif. And I love Grace's podcast. If you are a fan of hilarious streams of consciousness, very cute cats, and a glorious Irish accent, you will adore Grace's podcast. So please do nip over and check her out too. A couple of other brief thank yous, as having only just got back from the US yesterday, I've got quite a lot of catching up to do on other people's podcasts and Rhinebeck recaps. I'm very excited about the Rhinebeck recaps. I'm having pangs already of missing it. It was only a week ago, just over a week ago, and oh gosh, I just want to go back and relive it all over again, if I'm honest. So yes, but I know that a couple of people had called out my podcast on their channel, and so I want to take a chance to say thank you. The first of those is Lara of GYNX Yarns, formerly GYNX Yarns, now GYNX Handmade, who I had a chance to meet and squeeze in person, and she is wonderful and delightful and has some of the best hair you would ever see. Oh, it's such a glorious colour. But yes, so she had mentioned me over on her Rhinebeck recap, as well as we have LILLI of the Nordic Stitches podcast, who had mentioned me as well. So she is currently in the midst of Vlogtober and is doing a sterling job with keeping up with the content there. So I'm looking forward to catching up with her and going through some of her catalogue for this month. We also have Shannon of Bella Makes, and Shannon's podcast is a new to me podcast, but I had an opportunity just to catch a glimpse of her Rhinebeck and India Untangled recap, and it looks as though she made some glorious purchases, so I will be following her and seeing some of the things that she was up to in the last week or so. And last but not least, Katie of Inside Number 23, who is just a human being that I absolutely adore, and I was so delighted to be able to make her smile at the tail end, no pun intended, of her time spent growing another human, and I can only imagine how uncomfortable that must be at times. So yes, Katie, I was delighted to be able to make you smile, and hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit more of the same. To those of you who've posted about the podcast over on Instagram and recommended it to friends, I so hugely appreciate it. Again, as I mentioned, between travelling and frankly intermittent and patchy mobile coverage, I have struggled to keep up with everyone and come back to you and say a thank you to you in person, and I really do apologise for that. It's something I like to try and do wherever I can. Please know that I appreciate it, that I'm incredibly grateful to you, and I'm going to try and catch up with some of those messages that I've missed in the next few days. But either way, I really do appreciate it. Please know that I am just delighted to know that you're happy and frankly trusting enough to recommend this podcast to friends. I mean, in fairness, you might have recommended it to enemies, in which case, I'm not picky either way. But you're awesome. I really appreciate it. One last thing before we get into the podcast proper. Back in episode 3, I mentioned that for those of you who are unfortunately unable to attend Rhinebeck in person this year, I would be doing a giveaway for those of you who were enjoying Rhinebeck vicariously instead. And so I invited you to pop over into the Knitting Vicariously Ravelry Group and enter in the Rhinebeck giveaway thread what you would be doing around the weekend, just to make sure that we were able to enjoy it vicariously, even if you weren't able to attend in person. I also mentioned that I would be picking up a few goodies for you as part of a giveaway that I would be doing with Random Number Generator. Now, to those of you who've already put entries in, thank you so much. I'm going to extend it for another couple of days, and it can be a reflective, retrospective piece, so what you were doing, or perhaps what you would like to have been doing if you were unable to join us. And I would love you to go and put your thoughts over into that thread, but what I do want to do is just show you some of the prizes that I picked up, and therefore give you a little indication of what it is that you could be winning. And there's a little sneak peek coming on the bottom right here. So what I wanted to do as part of this was pick up a few bits and pieces from my time over in the US, not solely at Rhinebeck, but also at Indie Untangled, and focusing on some of the time that I spent elsewhere in the US as well. So the first thing that I picked up on my trip was actually before I even got to the town of Rhinebeck and its surrounding area, but in fact from when my friend Meredith and I, who we'll be hearing a lot about later on in the podcast, we stopped in at a couple of Brooklyn yarn stores on the day before we headed up to Indie Untangled and Rhinebeck, and one of those yarn stores was Woolen. And in Woolen, which was a glorious little place, we found this skein of amazingness. This is a skein of Yarn Over New York. It is a colourway that is exclusive to Woolen, the yarn store, and it is on their Times Square sock yarn base, and that is 75 merino, 25% nylon, and it is in the glorious Greetings from Gowanus colourway. You can see a little sneak there of the label. Isn't this stunning? I couldn't resist it because it's an exclusive colourway to Woolen. Because it was an opportunity for me to share it with you, I thought this was a wonderful starting point, and I realised I'm holding that upside down so you can't see what I'm showing you. But yes, it is pinks and oranges and speckly goodness and just fabulous. So that is the first of the skeins that I picked up for you. The second thing that I picked up is actually what these skeins are being stored in, which is the Indie Untangled bag for this year. So this was the 5th year of Indie Untangled taking place at Rhinebeck, and I was able to snag you a bag which is just the cutest little design. I love all these little creatures and sharing all their knitwear. Look. Isn't it adorable? So you will get the tote bag as well. And then in terms of one other thing that I picked up at Indie Untangled, which was an I Feel Like Knit badge. This is a brilliant little badge from Shelly Can, who was vending over there. It is just a fabulous little turquoise skein with an excellently punny saying, which I enjoyed that so much. So yes, you'll get a little I Feel Like Knit badge as well. Next up, we have a couple of skeins from Rhinebeck proper, so from the New York Festival of Sheep and Wool itself. And these skeins, while being ever so slightly woolly, I certainly wouldn't go so far as to call them rustic. I think they're already incredibly soft, and I think they'll soften up even more so once they've been washed and blocked. But they looked so good together, I couldn't resist. So these two skeins of gloriousness are from Bartlett Yarns, who were in Building B in Rhinebeck itself at the festival. You have the most glorious sort of slightly tweedy flecky grey, and then just this stunning purple with little yellow specks, little red specks, and they don't have tags on them. They're 100% wool. I cannot remember, I'm not even sure I ever knew specifically what went into them, but they are incredibly soft and squishy. They are a worsted weight, and as I say, I think they would look stunning paired together for colour work. So yeah, just really pretty yarns, and I wouldn't have any problem wearing these up against my neck, and I have a princess neck, we've established this. So yes, gloriously soft and squishy, these two. And then last but not least, I had a ticket to pop over and see Jill Draper's open studio on the Saturday night. Jill Draper is a fibre artist who is based in Kingston, which is over by Rhinebeck. She has an open studio every year on the Saturday evening of Rhinebeck, with a chance to go along and squish some of her glorious yarns in person, as well as make a purchase or two, which I might have done. But in terms of the prize, I had to buy the inevitable, the indefatigable gold colourway, and not just any gold. This is gold on her mohonk base, which is 100% lamb's wool. There is not the tiniest hint of itch that could ever come from using this yarn, and the colourway, I mean, the colour just sold me on it as soon as I saw it. I knew I had to give someone some gold to go in their stash. This is her deerskin jacket colourway. It is 113 grams 4 ounces, so it is 370 yards. It knits up at around about a sport weight, and it's just the most stunningly gold, brilliant, gorgeous skein. So yes, really, really beautiful yarns. Hopefully you are happy with the prizes that I've gathered up with this little stash of delightfulness that you'll be able to win. All scored happily away in here. And yes, as I say, I will be closing that thread on Thursday morning UK time, so that is Thursday the 1st of November. If you haven't already popped an entry in there, please do feel free, go over and do that. I will lock the thread on Thursday morning and I will report back with the winner, both in next week's podcast and in the thread itself. Right, we are getting into it, folks. Show notes, as ever, can be found both in the description box below, as well as over in the Knitting Vicariously Ravelry group on Ravelry. I will be continuing to post some links and some hashtags over on Instagram as well, in the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account. I am continuing to use that. I'm delighted for your feedback to say that it's useful and helpful for you. What I would say though, just a word of warning, the Knitting Vicariously account that I use over there is predominantly a one-way account. I use it to post the updates for each of the episodes that go out. I don't always remember to look at it with regards to replies or with messages, and so if you are contacting me over there and I don't get back to you, that is probably why. I have a limited attention span, and heaven knows that I could do with a little bit of focus every now and again. So if you do want to get in touch with me, I do always recommend that you use my personal account, which is Dunderknit, and Knitting Vicariously is something I'm going to use mostly just to share the episode updates with all of you, just so you're aware. This week, in terms of format, I'm going to be giving you a very quick rundown on what I've finished and some of the things that I have been working on before we get into the Post-Rhinebeck madness. There is an awful lot to get through, and not very much of it is actual knitting content, spoiler alert. So yeah, let's crack on. As ever, we're going to start with what I'm wearing, and what I'm wearing is this glorious, scummy awesomeness that is my Ellery sweater. Ellery is a pattern by Jen Emerson, and she is someone who I am so delighted that I had the opportunity to meet at Rhinebeck last weekend. Jen is someone who, again, as with a few others, I've been speaking to her for a good few years. I've knit a number of her patterns. I've knit her Jenica hat, which I adore. I have knit her Colina socks. I actually test knit her Colina socks, but this is the first of her sweater patterns that I have knit, and it is absolutely stunning. If you recognise this pattern but you can't think perhaps where we saw it, you might want to check the front page of Ravelry, because your girl here and a few of my wonderful friends happen to have made the front page of Ravelry, which is kind of a big deal, and I might have spat out some drink when I discovered it and someone texted me about it. Thank you, Elise. But yes, so we had a rainbow of Ellerys over at Rhinebeck last weekend, and we had an awful lot of purples, which I'm not by any means saying that there is too much purple going on, but our group, we have a lot of purple lovers, which is a good call. But I am somewhat at the other end of the complementary colour spectrum, in that I do favour a good old scummy green, and this scummy green in particular is stellar. So this is Plucky Cozy in their Ogre colourway. The fact that I've knit with Plucky Cozy means, of course, that it has been instantly discontinued, because that is how things go with Plucky and me. But it is a gorgeous, gorgeous base. It's a DK base. It is 90% merino and 10% camel. It is lovely and soft. I have my suspicions that this is going to pill like a beast, but I will say that at the moment, not having had too much wear, it's doing pretty well. It is, as I say, I love this colour so much. I did alternate skeins because, as you can see, it is a hand-dyed yarn, and in fact I will stand up so you can see the boob area, because that's what everyone loves. But yes, it is such a glorious pattern. So it is knit in the round, albeit in pieces from the top, joined front and back, and then knit in the round from the arms down. The cowl is picked up at the end, and then similarly with the sleeves, you pick up and do some back and forth shaping. And yeah, you've got a little bit of shaping here on the front just to take into account different body shapes, so on. You've got a random bit of my jeans that are making that bulge weirdly. The rest of me, you know, I can't take credit for bulging weirdly. It's just how I go. But yeah, it is such a stunning sweater. I love it. Sorry, face in. So yes, all of the edging from the cuffs to the collar to the hem down here at the bottom, all of that was knit on 4mm needles, which is a US 6, and the main body itself was knit on 4.5mm needles, which is a US 7. I will say that Jen's sizing has been a little bit on the small side up until now. I know it's something she's looking to see if there is an appetite to increase the sizing range on this. I myself actually made a few modifications to the largest size to get a size that worked for me. So I believe her largest size is a 44-inch chest. I made a few modifications to make it closer to a 46. I actually think, in all honesty, I probably could have got away with knitting the size 44, which is not something that happens often for me. I did get bang on gauge, so I don't think that's the problem, but yeah, I just think in terms of the fit, that could have worked quite nicely. As it is, I have ever so slightly kind of a little tiny bit of positive ease, which I have no problems with positive ease whatsoever. Positive ease and I are good long friends. But yeah, I really adore this sweater, and I'm even more delighted that we were able to join up and make a rainbow of Ellery's for Jen and Jen's first Rhinebeck, which as a fellow Rhinebeck virgin, I was just delighted that we were able to make it so special for her. Next up, in terms of finished objects, I have one for you this week, and it is about to clash horrifically with my sweater. This is my finished beeswax hat. Yes, those of you who were following along pre-Rhinebeck, you will be delighted to know that I did manage to get this finished. I mean, I say delighted, you might not have been that invested. You might give precisely 0 fucks, in which case, meh, I got it finished. This is, as I mentioned last time, a pattern by Amy Vandelar, who has just this fantastically textured hat. It is going to struggle on my camera to capture the gloriousness of it, but it's such a pretty texture. The pom-pom, as I have mentioned multiple times in previous week, is from COWLINGCOUNTRYCRAFTS. It is a faux fur pom-pom attached with a popper, or a snap if you're American. But yes, you can see some of the different crown decreases here as well. So really clever pattern, knit in hedgehog fibres merino DK in their coral colourway, which is exactly as obnoxiously bright, if not more so, than it is showing up here on the camera. I will put it on for you in the interests of showcasing it in person, if I can just find where the back of the hat is. Haven't got a clue. I'd like to say it's because I weaved in the ends really well, but I think it's more just my eyesight. Oh, there we go. I mean, this is quite the combo, don't you think? Manic crazy girl. But yes, it is, as I mentioned, just a really stunningly pretty, very fun textured hat. The yarn is delightfully and neo Dayglow obnoxious, but I really do enjoy it. It matches perfectly with the pom-pom. I went for the coral pom-pom as opposed to the grey pom-pom, but no, again, because it's a popper that I can switch things about, I just went with this on the basis of having an all single colour hat to be able to wear when I was out there, and to all intents and purposes it seems to have succeeded in the basis that an awful lot of people were able to spot me on the basis of the hat alone, which, given I had one day wearing my yellow staghead sweater and the second day wearing my grey stalactite sweater and this, I think this made me instantly recognisable to anyone that felt the need to do so. So yes, in terms of the pattern, all of this is knit on a 4mm needle, a US 6. Usually with hats you tend to find that the ribbing is knit on one size and then the body of the hat is knit on another. This one's slightly different in that it's all knit on a 4mm, and I would say I don't really think the ribbing suffered too much, which is great. Obviously it continues into the rest of the pattern, which makes sense to continue it rather than to change it. The only thing that I would say with this pattern is it's a tiny bit too short, just a tiny bit. So I love to have hats that come up to the sort of underside of my ears to keep them nice and cozy and warm, and particularly on the second day and the Sunday at Rhinebeck when I wore this, it was pretty chilly, so it was around about, I want to say 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit, who knows, I'm not a magician, but it was a little bit on the chilly side, and I know that a few of us who'd knit these hats were struggling a little bit just to keep our ears nice and cozy. A few folk had actually gone as far as to knit separate or kind of additional pattern repeats or partial repeats. Some people had knit the ribbing a little bit longer, and I think in hindsight that's what I would do. What I would do next time. In hindsight, that's probably what I would prefer to have done to get the extra length that I needed. But obviously, given it's right back at the start, there's not much more you can do. If I were to knit this again, stream of consciousness rambling, sorry about that, I would go for a slightly longer ribbing up front, probably by an extra sort of 1/2 inch to 1 inch, just to make it really kind of nice and cozy. It is a beanie shape, there's no real slouch to it, which I'm fine with. I quite love a beanie, but yeah, other than that, I really, really do like this hat. It wasn't quite as intuitive as some of the other cabled hat patterns that I've knit in the past. There was a little bit more attention that I had to pay to the rounds as I went through, because the motif is not quite as straightforward as it seems. I really like the effect that it gives. It just perhaps wasn't as kind of straightforward as I had perhaps anticipated when I started it. But that said, it's a great, great pattern. I'm still kind of planning to knit this in gold because, obviously, gold and honeycombs and gold. Yeah. But yeah, I really like it. Moving along to works in progress, I have finally cast on what is probably my most touted knit on this podcast so far. After so much talking about it, I have finally cast on my No Frills sweater in the Hey Sister Yarn Co Noir and the Dasmond Schaff Virgo I Want to Believe. It is currently living in my glorious travel project bag, which is a gorgeous bag by the little grey girl who is Gemma. I've previously shown her pencils bag that I use for my hat projects. This is a great sweater bag for on-the-go travel knitting. It's again kind of very lightly interfaced and therefore can be scrunched down quite easily when it's being carried in a bag. It's in a glorious green diamonds fabric. I'm fairly sure I bought this from Gemma at EYF earlier on this year. It is her sweater size, and it's the perfect size to carry things around that you're traveling with. But with no further ado, because I've had people asking about this since I very first mentioned it, and I just feel like I've been teasing you for a very long time now, so here it is. This is, as I've mentioned previously, the No Frills sweater by Petite Knit. I have previously knit this in a gorgeous selection of skeins from Full and Vine. I'll put the finished project item over here, photo over here rather. It is a sweater, a very simple, straightforward raglan sweater that is knit from the top down, including the collar, and it has sort of slightly deep, almost slightly batwing style shaping under the arms. I knit mine with a few fewer raglan increases to give me a slightly closer fit, because I was slightly concerned I was going to run out of yarn. I will probably do the same with this one because I really like the fit that I had with my previous one. But yeah, let's just take a minute to appreciate how pretty this is. The camera is blowing it out slightly. It's probably more accurate when I hold it back here closer to my face. You can get the impression that it's very much a kind of oil slick, which is exactly the look that I was going for, kind of glowy project with just these little kind of highlights and speckles and so on as you go. I wanted something that was a little bit iridescent, a little bit goth rainbow, and it's exactly what I'm getting with this, so I'm really pleased with how it's knitting up. As I mentioned, the yarns I'm using are Hey Sister Yarn Co in their Geronimo sock base, which is an 80/20 base, which is, you can see here, it is slightly tonal. I don't know how well that's going to show up on the camera, but it is just the most glorious kind of perfect black, and I'm holding it together with the yarn from Dasmond Schaff, which is the mohair silk lace weight in their I Want to Believe colourway. So these two together are creating this fabric here, and I absolutely love it. So yeah, I'm knitting the body of this sweater on 4mm needles, which is a US size 6. The collar I knit on a 3.5mm, a US size 5. I can just about see the ribbing that is there. I did a simple, it's just a German twisted cast on, which is my stretchy cast on of choice. I will sometimes commit to doing a tubular cast on or an alternating cable cast on, but for this, where it's going to be very hard to see, I would just as rather go with the twisted German cast on, which is great for all intents and purposes. My progress is being kept by this cutie. Look at him though, and he's being blown out because of the rest of the sweater there. If I do that, you can see him. This is another little progress keeper, beaded progress keeper from Hannah, who is the Corner of Craft. Hi Hannah. And again, I rave about these every time, but they make me smile so much. This guy is just the cutest little dragon with his little pink rosy cheeks. And I like to try and coordinate my little progress keepers with the project. And so given the slightly sort of gothy, Halloweeny vibe that this sweater is giving off, I thought it was best guarded by this cute little dragon guy here. So yes, I'm trying to think if there is anything else to say about this sweater. I cast this on as I was sitting waiting at the airport. Those of you who follow me on Instagram and saw my Instagram stories will have spotted that I was being quite keen, and I got to London Heathrow quite early on the day I was due to fly out, so I was able to enjoy a little bit of time spent casting this on. The majority of this was actually knit on the plane journey over there. I think I counted with my friend Meredith once we were there the number of rows I'd actually worked on during my time out in the US, and it was something like 10 or 12 raglan increases, which is not very much at all when you consider they're being done every other row, and there's really not that many stitches on the needles just right now. I did not get as much knitting done as I would have liked on this trip, and even on the way back I was all intent to cast on a hat and work on that, thinking it's an overnight flight, I'm sitting in economy, I'm never going to get a chance to sleep, and then promptly cast on the row, started knitting it and fell absolutely dead asleep. I think coming down with this cold had something to do with that. But yes, not quite as much knitting as I would perhaps have liked, but I'm still really enjoying how this is knitting up, and hoping to have it done in the next few weeks. Even though, as I say, holding two dark yarns together, it was a little bit trying on the plane on the ride over, but I just kept the light on and said bugger it to the people next to me that were getting a little bit sniffy about having the light on all the time. You know, you're not the boss of me, I don't know you. Yeah. So yeah, really loving this and how it is knitting up, and delighted too that I seem to have inspired a bunch of others who are also looking to do something very similar in knitting no-frills sweaters, either with black yarns or with dark yarns held together. The wonderful Jen Emerson, who is designer of the LRE pattern I mentioned a minute ago, she has started the Blame Dunderknit hashtag on Instagram, which I'm wholly in favour for. So if you decide that knitting vicariously just doesn't quite cut it, you're welcome to blame me. I am happy to be held accountable for all of your just knitting extravagances. I have no issue with this. So if you're struggling to justify it to yourself, just use the hashtag #BlameDunderknit and I will take full and absolute responsibility for anything that you wish to cast on. All power to you. I know a couple of people have mentioned as well that when it comes to mohair, it's something they really struggle with, either because they don't want to knit with it or because they're not very happy wearing it. Their skin perhaps doesn't react to it quite so well. I will say, between this and my no-frill sweater that I knit in Woolen Vine yarns, in her Ghost Lace and her Volca bases, I've not found either of these to be prickly or something that I'm sensitive to at all. And I know in previous years with some mohair that I've used in the past that was very much the case. I don't know if something's changed or if the silk content makes a significant difference, but it might be worth just giving these yarns a squeeze to see how you feel. If, however, this still absolutely isn't for you, and I wholly understand that, there are some alternatives that you can look at. So I popped into the Ravelry group earlier on today. I do need to do an awful lot of catching up with that group, but I did see that Bella Luna 79, thank you so much for this, has mentioned that she is going to be substituting Malabrigo lace instead of the mohair, because it's something again that she's not a particular fan of, and I think that could work really nicely. Malabrigo lace is quite suitably fluffy. It should give a similar kind of effect to it, albeit not quite as kind of hairy and multi-stranded as the mohair itself, which could be something that works for you. Alternatively, if you're not too fussed about the sort of fluffy texture and you just want to knit the pattern itself, I reckon you could do that with a really heavy fingering weight or even a sport weight, and you'd get a very sort of similar shape and effect with it as well. So if you're not a fan of mohair, don't feel restricted by it. There are other options that you can look at, or alternatively, just knit the pattern straight, because it's a great, straightforward, simple pattern, and I do think everyone needs at least one of these, clearly, in their wardrobes. The second project that I'm working on is in a bit of a special bag, actually. This is a bag that was sewn for me by a very, very dear friend of mine who happens to be in my in real life knitting group. Hi, Margaret. She is just the most incredible sewist, and at the moment doesn't sell her bags online, but I'm hoping that we might be able to convince her otherwise, because they're absolutely stunning. So Margaret and her daughter Max, they gifted these to us, us being me and Meredith, as part of our Rhinebeck trip. We were hoping that Max was going to be able to join us, but due to a series of different circumstances, both she and another friend were unable to make it this year. But trust me, I'm planning ahead for next year already. It's going to be fine. But yeah, so these are just the most glorious little bags. It's a fantastic little fabric. It's quite stiffly interfaced, which means it keeps it nice and sturdy to knit from. And look, she's even done like full-on pockets inside and everything. A little woolly, but like seriously, Margaret, get with the program. We'll get you on Etsy. It'll be fine. For this project, I am working with some yarn that I picked up right at the very tail end of my trip. So there was a little bit of yarn purchasing that went on when I was over in the US. I'll be touching on some of that later. But right at the very tail end of my trip, I was there. So I was flying out very last thing on the Saturday night, Saturday the 27th of October. I had a day to spare. And so when you have a day to spare and you're only working with hand luggage at this point because everything else has been stored, and you're thinking to yourself, right, well, you know, I've shit the bed on quite a lot of yarn elsewhere. I should probably try and play it cool. What you really need to do at that point is you need to make an arrangement with a friend to go and sit in a yarn shop for a few hours. Yeah, sterling plan, right? Right. So I was delighted that on my last day I was able to meet up with Kristen of the Vine podcast, who is, as you will have seen from her podcast, just the most delightful human being. Just so funny. Kristen and I first met at EYF earlier on in the year. We had a little bit of time to spend together there. We spent an even smaller amount of time together at Indie Untangled this year, and so I was so pleased that she was able to spare a little bit of time and pop over and meet me at Brooklyn General. Brooklyn General is a store I'd visited very briefly at the front end of my trip. I was ever so delighted to go back and spend even more time there, and it meant that I had a chance to meet the owner Catherine, as well as Carleen, who was working there on the day. She is Carleenergy over on Instagram, and Made with Carleenergy is her podcast, and it was just so much fun. We met a few other knitters who were there too, who were just great conversationalists and so much fun to have a chat with. But then yeah, there were also some some purchases. So the yarn that I purchased while I was there, or one of the yarns that I purchased while I was there, is Woolfolk Snow, and as with all of the Woolfolk yarns, it is just the most gorgeous and soft and gloriously coloured yarn you can imagine. This is Woolfolk Snow in the 1+2 colourway, which is a marl of both their natural and their silver colourways together. I'm not sure how well that's coming across on the screen, but hopefully you can see it there. It's really glorious. Obviously, it's softer than Kittens because all of the Woolfolk yarn is just so deliciously soft. In addition to this colour, I also bought a second with the original intention of using them together with colour work. And the second colour, you're not going to be even remotely surprised to know that it's this gold. Because gold, and because beautiful, and because gold. And again, look at it. Look at it. Look how soft it is. It's so soft and fluffy. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, actually, what I really want is not a hat that is both silver and gold, but a hat that is silver and a hat that is gold. So I'm going to knit two separate hats. So this one is yet to be wound up and cast on. This is the product of someone who is on her own in an airport with limited food options and a lot of time spent hand winding a ball. So I wound that up, And you'll see that I've got super far with this because, as I mentioned, I got on the plane and then promptly fell asleep, only to pick this up again a few hours later. So this is what I have so far. It is good, no? It is full hat, yes? No, this is a very small, meagre amount of work. But what this is going to become is a glorious hat in the form of Slayble by Willie Wormhead, and I will put her picture up here just now, obviously credit to her. This pattern has been on my to knit list for years, and I mean literally years. I want to say it was about 2013 when I first saw this, maybe even earlier, and I've wanted to knit it ever since and just never quite got round to it. And so I was thinking last night and going through, and I had a bunch of different options for these two yarns to be held together in the colour work, and thinking how nice they would look together, and then stumbled across my Slayble pattern and went, I think this finally needs to happen. So yes, I have now cast this on. I'm really looking forward to it. It's such a gorgeous mix of just that texture and those big statement cables. I think it's going to be stunning. This is going to be the perfect winter hat, and I'm not even sure it's going to need a pom-pom. I know that is a rare statement for me, but I think this might be suitably awesome without requiring a pom. So we shall see. I mean, never say never, right? Everything is better with a pom-pom, but I think this might be just wonderful enough without. We shall see. The pattern recommends that you use a 3mm needle, which is a US 2.5, and a 3.25mm needle, which is a US 3. I will say that given I had just finished up knitting all of my cardamom coffee hats, I had a 2.75, which is a US 2, and the 3.25, which is a US 3, in my knitting bag, and so that's what I'm using instead. It means I'm going to have a slightly smaller gauge for the ribbing, but as I've cast on for the largest size, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference at all. So yes, hoping that now I'm not sitting on planes being kicked by women that are sitting next to me. Not even joking, kind of rude, but not intentional. She wasn't like full on going for me, but she just happened to kick me and not apologise. But it's fine, I'm over it, as you can see. But I think now that I'm not faffing around with transport, I will be able to knit a little bit more on this, as well as my no frills sweater, and get those underway. So that's it. I told you that we were going to be pretty light on knitting this week as far as actual knitting goes, but the good news is I planned ahead and I've made up for it with the vicarious knitting, because holy moly is there a lot of yarn to get through. So as we move into vicarious knitting, I have acquired some things during my trip to the US. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through a little bit more of my trip in general, some of the things I saw and had a chance to do, some of the people I was able to meet, and show you some of the purchases I made as I went along. I did happen to show over on Instagram my pre-Rhinebeck shopping, if you will. So one of the glorious things about knowing that you're going over to meet up with a bunch of friends and do a little bit of yarn shopping is that you're obviously going over with an empty suitcase. And so both me and my glorious friend Meredith, who I will talk endlessly about because we had such a fun time together, we'd been planning to go to Rhinebeck for, I want to say, at least 2 years. Meredith is from the US, she lives in Michigan, but she's just moved back there after spending a few years abroad in Australia. And between her being in Australia and me being here in the UK, previous Rhinebecks just hadn't been a goer for us. And so it was a little bit of planning and a little bit of kind of vicarious Rhinebecking that we were able to do in previous years that finally culminated in the chance for us to meet up in person in New York, head up to Rhinebeck, stay there, and then we had a little extended road trip around New England, visiting and just experiencing a little bit more of what that part of the world has to offer before finally coming back to Earth with a bump and heading home a few days later. Of course, when you're meeting up with a friend from the other side of the world who happens to have access to some different yarn dyers, what you do is between you, you decide that maybe you might do a little bit of pre-shopping on either side of the pond and then do some swapping when you meet up. And that does mean that I already did a little bit of damage before I even got to the US. And so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to separate out the pre-shopping that I did, the skeins that I bought ahead of time, and share those with you on next week's podcast, because otherwise we will genuinely be here for days and I'm not quite sure my body and my voice can take too much of this. So you're going to need to excuse me, but as I say, I'm going to split it out, and that way we'll have a little bit more content to work on next week as well. So in terms of my trip itself, I flew out on Wednesday the 17th, flew out of London Heathrow, met up with Meredith in JFK over in New York, and then the two of us headed over to an apartment that we had in Brooklyn. And it was my first time staying in Brooklyn. I've been to New York a number of times. I even lived there briefly when I was much younger, but it was my first time really spending any time in Brooklyn, and I really enjoyed it. We had the opportunity to meet up with a number of friends ahead of Rhinebeck as well, which was amazing. Went out for some incredible Italian food, had a glorious cocktail at a bar nearby as well. While over in Brooklyn, we also had a chance to meet up with a friend of ours who is Jess, and Jess is Film Fromage over on Instagram, but she also has the VIRGOMADE store on Etsy. Jess makes some of the most incredible smelling candles. I was lucky enough already to have one of these in my collection, which she very kindly shipped to me, although the cost of the shipping made it a little bit prohibitive to get more of these. And so how delighted I was to be able to go over there and grab some of these from her in person. These are just some of the most glorious smelling candles. You don't have smell-o-vision and therefore you don't know, but just trust me when I say she's got a glorious selection of like woodsy smells and very kind of musky, like spicy sort of smells as well, which they're my personal preferences. I'm not much of a one for florals or sort of fruity smells, but some of these are just woodsy and gloriousness and just divine. So if you have a little bit of a hankering for some candles, I do recommend that you go over and check out Jess's Etsy store, which is VIRGOMADE, as I mentioned. We then headed over to some of Brooklyn's wonderful local yarn stores, and the first of those was Woolen. I've already shown the first of the skeins that I picked up there as part of the Vicarious Rhinebeck giveaway, but the second one that I picked up there was this gloriousness. This is Molly Girl yarns. It may look unassuming, but this is one of the glorious silk yarn skeins that she does that glows under a black light. Now, I am no longer in my teens or 20s. I don't tend to frequent too many places where there happen to be black lights, but even in the regular light, this is such a fun little speckled skein. So between the glorious kind of purple burgundies that are up here and the tonals and the slight sort of soft highlighter yellow that's in here too, there's just an awful lot within the skein that's so pretty. Look at that lovely sort of deep purple in there too. So yes, this is her bouncer yarn. This is 100% superwash merino, and therefore not necessarily the best yarn for making socks unless I were to pair it with some contrast heels, toes and cuffs for additional durability. But I don't know, I'm quite tempted to make this into gloves actually. I think this could be, or fingerless mitts, I think this could be a gloriously versatile pair of hand warmers, gloves, mittens, whatever you choose. So yes, this may have to go in there. And the colourway, because I highly forgot to mention that, is No Sleep Till Brooklyn. Because of course, this again is a skein and a colourway that is exclusive to Woolen, and another part of the reason that I picked it up in the first instance. So yeah, really enjoying this. And Molly Girl is a yarn dye that I've heard a lot about, and so delighted to have some of her yarn in my stash. The other thing that we picked up while we were in Woolen was actually not something that I purchased, but rather a gift from my delightful friend Meredith, who maintains that if you're going to be in New York, then you're going to need a project bag that has New York taxis all over it. And how could I possibly disagree? This is another purchase from Woolen itself. So Woolen had a number of different project bags that were in there. This is holding a few kind of leftovers, bits and bobs skeins, but it's a really decent size, I will say. So excuse the zip noise. It has a sizable amount of bits and pieces and stash odds and ends in there already, and so I reckon would make a great kind of small accessories bag, or even potentially something for socks. But this bag is by Knit Spin Quilt, who is Alicia Beer, and she's based in Brooklyn, and as I say, this is something we picked up within Woolen. So she has an Etsy shop, which is Knit Spin Quilt on Etsy. I will put the link for that along with all the other links in the show notes below. But yes, this just felt so deeply appropriate. So thank you, Meredith. I love my present. After woolen, we wandered down to Brooklyn General, and Brooklyn General is such a glorious store. I don't think I'd fully appreciated the range of yarns that they had in there until I was there in person, and so yes, both woolen and Brooklyn General were stunning, and definitely within walking distance of each other if you do fancy making the trip. But when we were in Brooklyn General, there were a few skeins that caught my eye, surprise surprise. The first of those was right at the door as I went in, and this is Magpie Fibres in her swanky stock base. So let me try and hold that so you can see, because I'm still using my phone camera at the moment because it's what I know, and I just wanted to make sure that I got this out the door, but it does mean that some of the colours are still blowing out a little bit, but there you go, you can see. So this is Magpie. It is her swanky sock base, which is an 80-10-10 merino cashmere nylon. It's 378 yards, and it is in her Serge de Nîmes colourway, which I'm going to put up there for you to see it, because heaven knows my French pronunciation at the best of times is questionable. When I have a cold is non-existent, but it is such a glorious mid-blue, almost denim in places, distressed denim colourway with these little flecks of rust and gold and white in here at the top, and I couldn't walk past this. I touched it, first mistake, and then looked closely at the speckles, second mistake, and I'm done for. So yes, this in terms of what it wants to be when it grows up, I don't know. It's soft enough to be an accessory, so something around my neck potentially. It might be something that gets paired with something else, but I also have no guilt about buying single skeins that just marinate in my stash for a little bit until I come up with a delightful use for them. So this may well be one of those, but it is so gloriously soft and such a pretty colour. I had to bring it home with me. So yeah. The other part of my purchase from Brooklyn General was some yarn that, you know, when you go all the way to another country, what you really need to do is pick up some yarn from Scotland. Yes, but in my defence, this was yarn that I'd never actually seen over here in the UK. I'm not sure if they're a relatively new dyer or if it's just yarn that I hadn't seen stocked anywhere else, but this is yarn from, again, with the French pronunciation, these are actually bees, just so we're clear, biche et bûche, or biche and bûche. I'm not entirely sure, but I will hold it up here and hopefully at some point the camera will stop blowing out so you can see it. But this is their Le Petit Lamb's Wool, again with the French. This is 100% lamb's wool. It is so gloriously soft. Again, this is ever so slightly woolly, definitely not rustic. I would gladly wear just about anything out of this. It is incredibly soft. I bought it in 4 colours, one of which I hand wound into a bowl with the ambition of starting something, and I will talk about that in a second, but let me hold them up so you can see them. So these are the 4 colours that I purchased. You have here, I believe this is their light grey, or it might be very light grey colourway. I think it's just light grey. You have very dark grey. I like what they've done here with the naming. This is good. Very dark grey. You have here the light pink colourway, and then lastly you have turquoise, and turquoise is again just beautiful. It looks like a very sort of loosely spun 2-ply, but my intention is to use all of these together in a Northport hat. I actually talked about Northport hat on, I believe, episode 3, after Jen Emerson, who seems to be making a regular appearance on this week's podcast, had posted about it over on Ravelry and Instagram as her Vicarious Knitting, and it's a pattern that I love, and so actually using these for a Northport felt like an excellent choice. I did wind it up, the main colour that I'm planning to use, with the intention of starting it, but in all honesty this took me so long to hand wind this that I'd lost all steam and ended up going to bed straight away afterwards, because I'm nothing if not, you know, a hardcore party girl. In my defence, if you could call it that, so you do get 270 yards in each of these skeins. They are 50-gram skeins, but there's an awful lot of yardage to them, again because it's lamb's wool and so lofty and light. you get, so 270 yards, which is 248 meters, and the recommended needle size is a 3mm or a 3.5, which is a US 2.5 to a US 4. So perfect in that sense for the Northport hat, which again is knit on a 2.75 and a 3.25 needle, so US 2 and a US 3. So yes, this is definitely going to be a Northport at some point. It's really just a case of when, and given that I'm currently using my needles for my Slabel hat, I may finish that before casting this on, but this, I mean, this needs to happen for Christmas this year, right? It's just, they're so pretty. So yes, some more lovely glorious yarn from Brooklyn General, and as I say, it was such a nice store to spend some time in. I was delighted I got a little bit more time to spend there at the end of the week with a few more purchases. After our time spent in Brooklyn, Meredith and I jumped in our hire car on Friday morning and made our way up to Rhinebeck and Sogerties. And while I was desperately hoping to get there in time for Needles Up and have a chance to meet Sue and Chelsea and some of their amazing vendors in person, unfortunately we didn't quite make it. So between some of the traffic that we hit unexpectedly on our way up there and the joys of just having to drive a rental car through the streets of Brooklyn and Manhattan, which was fine, a little bit challenging at times, but fine, we weren't able to make it up there in time, unfortunately. I would have loved to see Tuft Woolens in person and Fibre Nymph Dye Works in person, but unfortunately, as I say, we just ran out of time on the day, and given we had tickets for Indie Untangled's second slot, which was the 3 to 5 p.m, we had to make sure that we were there promptly, because there was a giant countdown clock on the wall, and there is nothing like a countdown to make you feel the pressure when it comes to getting around, seeing everyone, squeezing all these people that you've been looking forward to seeing, and making a few yarn purchases here and there. So without further ado, I will take you through my Indie Untangled acquisitions. Now, there were so many dyers to see and to choose from while we were there. I didn't go in with a system. I didn't really look at much ahead of time. I did pre-order a couple of bits from Shelley Can, one of which I've talked about as part of the Vicarious Rhinebeck giveaway. Another couple I will show you momentarily. But for the most part, I was just looking to go along and be grabbed by a few different skeins and things, and Indie Untangled absolutely did not disappoint. Indie Untangled is a fringe event that was set up by Lisa, hi Lisa, a few years ago, so I believe this was its 5th event this year, and it brings together a few different indie dyers and makers who are who would like an opportunity to vend alongside the main Rhinebeck event, which is the New York Festival of Sheep and Wool. And it's just a great opportunity to see and experience a few additional makers outside of the established few who attend the main festival itself. And so, yeah, it was fantastic to see and to squeeze some of these yarns in person for the first time. So I did a little bit of wandering around. I almost made it the whole way round without making any purchases. I like to try and do an early lap just to try and get my eye in, just to see what's happening, but I did fall down at one place in particular. I fell down at Backyard Fiberworks, and the reason that I fell down is because there were only 2 of these skeins left and they needed to be mine. Can you see why? This is absolutely stunning, and luckily you've got her logo right there front and center. But if I just tip it so you can experience the gloriousness of this yarn, it is just incredible. It goes from this kind of really deep green all the way through to this slightly more bright, it's not quite as kind of like acid crazy green as it's being made out on the screen just there, but it is definitely a very vibrant and bright green. And so these 2 are both her single ply prairie yarns in the Alpine colourway, so 100% superwash merino, 400 yards, 400 grams, fingering weight, and just seriously though, they glow. And so I saw these 2 hiding out on a high shelf, and I was all prepared to walk away, but then I went over and just touched them. And again, I love single ply merino. I have a very special place for it in my heart. In terms of garments, I appreciate it's not the sturdiest, it does tend to pill, but it makes some glorious accessories. And in fact, this cubby hole right up here, and a little bit of this one here, they're predominantly single ply yarns, and I love using them so much. My downfall was touching these, because these are gloriously soft, and as I say, just the glow that is coming off from them, oh, they are stunning. Plus my lovely and delightful friend Ali, who is Ali Kazam over on Instagram, she was working on their booth and I got to hug her in person. And again, Ali's someone I've been speaking to for years, and we've spoken quite a bit over the last year in particular. And just, yeah, between that and seeing these over her shoulder and making a quick beeline for them, I really could not resist. So these two definitely had to come home with me. So following that, I made my way back round to the start and then started my loop all over again. So one of the first stands that I came to was, again, a dyer that I had spoken to a little bit on Instagram, someone you might have heard of. It just so happens that she has the incredible Junk Yarn yarn line, and this is Kemper of Raybot on Instagram. Junk Yarn is her yarn dyeing brand, and this incredibly stunning colour is on her Junk Yarn DK base, which is 100% superwash merino in the Rachel colourway. And would you look at it? I mean, it is again a glorious denim-y blue with all of these speckles and just all of the prettiness, and it is just, it's stunningly pretty. So she had so many yarns that I could have chosen from, honestly. I do have a couple of her colourways in more kind of sock yarns, but this I felt really needed to be a hat, and quite the statement hat at that. So you'll see a lot of jewel tones in the purchases that I've been making. I do love me a jewel tone, and this blue was certainly one of the most stunning colourways to jump at me while I was there. So yes, this had to come home with me, and it will be a hat of some description. Possibly something lightly cabled, possibly something relatively plain, just to make the yarn really sing. But we shall see. It feels like there's cashmere in this, but there isn't. It's such a glorious soft base. Love it. Moving further around, one of the other booths that I was just stunned into wandering into was the Lamstrings yarn booth. She had some incredible colourways. I've mentioned that jewel toned is very much me, and you may have gathered that by looking at the stash wall behind me. But when I wandered into this booth, I really had no intention of picking up 3 skeins of single ply merino, and yet that is exactly what I did. Because how could I not? I mean, come on now. Look at these 3 together. So these are all on her Sadie Singles base. It is 100% superwash merino, 1 ply, high twist, and the colours are, let me try and read this. So we've got Little Miss Macabre here at the end, which again, with my cold to enunciate more clearly, Little Miss Macabre. We have, again, you can see, isn't this the perfect, like, Halloween-y stunning colourway? And then it was situated quite near this skein, which is Vanity, and you can see here some of the pinks and the gloriousness that's in here also gets repeated in here, as well as a few of the oranges, which then feeds really nicely into, last but not least, Rooibos. And these 3 together are just stunning. And so I seem to have found myself a partial fade, and it's not what I was intending. I don't normally gravitate towards the orange because I feel like there's a danger of it clashing with the hair, quite frankly, but apparently I don't have that problem with pink, which is interesting. So yes, these 3 together make me very happy, and accidentally on purpose there might be another part to this fade later on. We'll see. Having squished some of this yarn in person at Brooklyn General, I was only delighted to see Magpie have a gigantic booth at Indie Untangled itself. And as I say, I'd squished some of their MCN fingering previously, and so to see that they had some MCN DK, how could I not? Because 1, gold, obviously, and 2, this amazingness. So both of these are their swanky DK base, which again is 80-10-10 merino cashmere nylon. This here is in the, I want to say Tupelo honey. That's the pronunciation I'm going to go for. And this is in the PSL colourway, Pumpkin Spice Latte for the uninitiated. And for anyone who's not aware, I am incredibly basic when it comes to my lattes and when it comes to autumn, and therefore this was definitely going to come home with me. Now, had I lost my wits entirely, which by this point was a real possibility, I was considering a sweater quantity of these two to make a Guthrie. I know. It would have been amazing and incredible, but for a couple of things. I'm not really sure I want to knit a Guthrie. It's a glorious pattern. It's a sweater by Caitlin Hunter. It is all over colourwork. You will undoubtedly have seen it again if you're on the internet and you have eyes, but I'm not really sure I'm quite that committed to having full-blown colourwork all over my body. That said, if I were to be so, these are the colours that I would have chosen, because Guthrie is one of those pullovers. It looks really nice with sort of an almost a low contrast option between the two. So with these you are getting a 115 grams, which is 250 yards, and so I ended up getting 2 skeins of the Tupelo Honey and 1 of the PSL. So between them they will be, I want to say maybe something striped, maybe something with colour work, but probably an accessory rather than a garment, because unfortunately 750 yards of DK weight is not quite enough to cover my body. But we shall see. So it's certainly something that's versatile. It's something that's so soft, and I'm really looking forward to knitting these colours up at some point. But it wouldn't be me if I didn't buy a single sweater quantity at an event. And just when hope was lost, I stumbled across the most incredible colour at Duck Duck Wool. Now, I'm doing that thing again where I'm channeling this colour in what I'm wearing already. But trust me when I say, this is amazing. I'm going to try and hold all 4 of these up so you can see. This is their sport base, which is 100% merino. But look. So let me hold one of these up so you can see. They have just the most gorgeous branding. Love everything about it. And the yarns themselves, they are so tonal and so gloriously variegated. Look at this, it's almost kind of a full olive brown in here at some point. And I can't. These were on a table and I kept going back over to them and back over to them, and in the end I just had to forsake it and say, look, just take my money, because this needs to happen. As I say, it is their sport weight base. It is 100% superwash merino. It's 320 yards per skein, and the colourway is Mary of Soul, which is excellent. So I do have 4 of these, which should be more than enough to knit myself a sweater. However, just to be on the safe side, what I thought I would do is, rather than purchase a 5th and potentially not use it, is just to ensure that I had the versatility, I'd also pick up a contrast colour. Now what this would allow me to do is, if I chose to do some colour work and have this in at the yoke, it would certainly mean that I'd be able to get a very full sweaters quantity out of this. This may look like a really simple, straightforward sort of taupey grey colour, but actually when you look at it you start to see there's even more kind of variegation and prettiness in here, and some of the brown tones that are so evident in the Mary of Soul yarn, you can see start to be picked up in this as well. I'm not entirely sure how well it's coming up on the camera, but it's certainly not a boring sort of flat grey colour at all, far from it. And of course, this is called Sweet Chai O' Mine. Love a pun, you know me. Ugh, it's just so pretty. Oh, there you are, you can see some of the variegation in here now. But again, on the sport base, 328 yards, just so pretty. So this was my sweater quantity. I have no regrets whatsoever, because this is going to be absolutely stunning. And yeah, nothing if not predictable. I think that's it for my yarn purchases at Indie Untangled, but I was able to score a few additional pins as well. So one of the first booths that I hit up, as I mentioned, was the junk yarn booth, and I'd been eyeing these pins up for a very, very long time. So Kemper's pins are adorable, which is a little love your junk pin in the mint green. And as we established on episode 4's podcast, as much as I love the mint green, it does not love me, and therefore in pin form is one of the safest ways that I can enjoy it for myself. So yeah, little love your junk pin from Kemper of junk yarn. I also, as part of my purchase at Duck Duck Wool, was given one of their glorious little pins as well. Their Duck Duck Wool branding. Their branding is absolutely adorable, and I love this little girl who is knitting away on her sweater. I'm conscious my lighting leaves a lot to be desired at this point. Yeah, really, really sweet little pin from them as well. As I mentioned, I'd made a couple of pre-orders with Shelly Can, who had her booth there too. One of those was for the Pussy Hat Craftivist pin, which I have admired from a distance for a very, very long time. And anyone who knows anything about me will know that this is bang on both my political persuasions and my general aesthetic. So yeah, love me this pin. And I also picked up her Indie Untangled pin specifically on this delightfully holographic background, which is going to make it slightly difficult for you to see it. But this is her Indie Untangled pin. Let me just see if I can convince it to focus. No, none for you. But it says on here, 5th Annual Indie Untangled Trunk Show, October 2018, Rhinebeck, New York. And so as a little memento, this is perfect. And it will be in pride of place. As I drop things everywhere, it will be in pride of place on my bag. And last but not least, the pin that was trying so hard to get your attention there was a pin from my glorious friend Knitting and Gin. Knitting and Gin, who is Sue on Instagram, or rather Sue is Knitting and Gin on Instagram. Both Sue and Max that I mentioned earlier were meant to be coming over with us to Indie Untangled and Rhinebeck, but it didn't work out. But it did mean that I was able to take a little bit of Sue over in spirit between her Knitting and Gin bag, which I love, and Sue had also designed a pin explicitly for Indie Untangled, which along the same lines of Knitting and Gin, this is her Whiskey and Whip pin. I believe that Lisa of Indie Untangled has a few of these left on her website. If not, I know that Sue, who is suestratford.co.uk, also has a few of these on her website. If this is up your street, and I guarantee it will be, because look, it's got a little tumbler with knit stitches on it. I'm not sure if you can see that, if it's picking up on the camera, but it's so cute. So if this is up your boat, I really, really do recommend that you grab one of these too, because they're incredibly fun. And basically, it's knitting, it's a pun, it's booze related. What is not to love? And now we move on to Rhinebeck proper. So after a wonderful, glorious evening at Indie Untangled, where I got the chance, as I mentioned, to wander around, to squish a whole array of yarns, see people in person, I also had the opportunity to bump into a number of friends and people for the first time. So I happened to see Caitlin Hunter while I was wearing my Tecumseh, and had my Tecumseh boobs splashed all over her Instagram stories, which was delightful and not nearly as provocative as it sounds. But we also had a picture of a couple of us in our matching Tecumsehs, so both me and Jess, who I mentioned earlier, with the candles by VIRGOMADE, so Film Fromage over on Instagram, and Vanessa, who is Nessa Knits over on Instagram. All three of us had made Tecumsehs, and we had a picture of our matching Tecumsehs very kindly taken for us by Kristen of Villenvine, who, as I mentioned, I bumped into right at the end of the show. Kristen has some stellar photography skills, as I think pretty much everyone who's ever seen her podcast will know. And so she was so kind as to take a couple of pictures for us, as well as one of me in my Tecumseh. I'll pop them up here, and you can see that I am precisely as professional in the photo shoot as I would be in real life. So yeah. It's stellar. Thank you so much for taking those, Kristen. I love them so much. But then yes, so we went home. We had a nice restful evening ahead of Rhinebeck proper the next day, and then Meredith and I got up bright and early and made our way to Rhinebeck, the front doors of the New York Sheep and Wool Festival, just in time for the gates to open. We contemplated getting there and queuing, but we're not big queuers, and it did say that the rain was going to come first thing in the morning, right bang smack on the time when everyone was going to be gathering for the queue. So in the end, we hauled our arses out of bed just in time to get there for the gates opening and everyone moving through in a delightful sort of swift fashion. But yes, Rhinebeck is incredible. It's huge. You cannot appreciate how huge it is until you are there. And I say this as someone who has been to festivals here in the UK for a number of years, which vary in size from a few rooms in a hall all the way up to, I think the largest festival I've been to in the UK, I mean, Edinburgh's certainly close, but I think in terms of just the amount of space it occupies, it's probably Fibre East, between all of the different tents and venues that they have on site. And I mean, all of them pale into comparison when it comes to Rhinebeck. Rhinebeck is a scale unto itself. There are 3 main buildings with a 4th one with food. There's a number of different barns. There are areas of outside. There are food vendors all over the place. I would be surprised if I saw as much as 60% of the festival. I know there are at least 3 or 4 buildings I didn't get a chance to go into, and part of that is down to the fact that I ended up just being absolutely shattered at the end of the first and second days, but also it was down to the fact that I'm going to take you through the yarn purchases that I made, but for me, and I think a lot of people do say this about Rhinebeck is an opportunity to meet with people who you've only ever spoken to online, and therefore the amount of time that you spend with people, squeezing them in real life and having a chance to hang out and to chat, that really is some of the most precious time spent there. And everything else, including the yarn, is very much a nice to have. But don't get me wrong, it is very nice to have. I posted a couple of pictures on my Instagram story, and in fact I have saved it as a highlight, so if you do want to go over to my account on Instagram, which is Dunderknit, you'll be able to go into my profile page, and one of the highlights at the top in a circle will be Rhinebeck 2018, and you can see a couple of pictures that I took on the day. I don't have any vlog footage to share. I'm really sorry about that. As I mentioned, this was my first time. I'm also still very new at the whole podcasting thing and not very good at remembering to take vlog footage. Photos I can just about manage. Vlog footage, bit of a step too far, and so apologies for that, although I am looking to improve. But in addition to a couple of the pictures that I snapped first thing in the morning, we did go past the Miss Babs booth. We did not go in. Miss Babs, if you're unaware, is a fantastic dyer who's based in the US. This is one of the very few trunk shows that she does, and it's a queue or a line that goes out the door of the main building and almost around the building, in terms of how much demand there is for her products. Now, we went back on the second day and I was able to grab a skein for a friend, and there was no queue whatsoever. And so to have the commitment to go and do that for the first part of your first day is extraordinary, and I applaud everyone who's done it. Not for me. But around the corner from the Miss Babs booth was a dyer that I've heard an awful lot about in podcasts over the years, and that is Lisa Souza. And I was entirely compelled and enabled to buy 4 skeins of her stunningly beautiful Polworth silk. This is a DK weight. It is 85% Polworth wool, 15% silk, 400 yards per hank of this, which is absolutely glorious. 4.8 ounces rather, and it's in her colourway Forest. And yeah, can we just, it's got to be done. This was an amazing deal. I had to buy it, clearly, and it is DK. I reckon it could be fairly flexible and may even knit up at a sport weight. Let me try and show you this without dropping everything off my lap. But you can see the silk, it really does, it just glows. And huge, glorious, squishy hanks. So this will be a sweater of some description. Because of the silk content, I think it's probably going to be something quite drapey, quite flowy. I'm not a big fan of cardigans, so it probably won't be a cardigan, but certainly a sort of longer, slightly flowy sweater. So I'm open to ideas, absolutely. But I knew that this had to come home with me for something along those lines. Next up was another booth that had a queue not quite to rival that of Miss Babs, but it was certainly significant. And this was the Harrisville Designs booth. Now, Harrisville Designs have a number of different yarns from their Shetland and Highland bases all the way through to the likes of Stocking Peace Fleece and a lot of the Brooklyn Tweed yarns. And then finally as well, they have their new Nightshades Cormo that they've just come out with. Now, I know an awful lot of people were very excited about the Cormo. At the moment, because I'm knitting with black yarn, I felt like I'd kind of hit my quota for that at the moment. The Nightshades are incredibly dark and deep, almost blacks, but with a very, very slight, I don't know whether it's a complete ply or whether it's just a little bit of a colour that's thrown into the fibre as well as part of the mix. But they have slight kind of hues and variations of the Nightshades where there's one colour that's kind of thrown in alongside the black. So you have things like Static, which is a tiny little bit of white that's in there too. There are ones with sort of plums and navies, and certainly Meredith and a couple of other people who I met while I was there, including Mary Annarella on Instagram, I know we're very excited about the Nightshades. So we stopped in and I queued with them for that. And because I was standing in the queue anyway, I might have purchased some of their Highland worsted yarn in the Zinnia colourway, which is similar to my beeswax hat, full obnoxious coral. I love it. Now, unfortunately, they didn't have it there with them at the stand, but they were able to ship it, albeit not internationally. So that is going to go to my friend Meredith, and she's going to send it over to me by way of a lovely thing to do. I didn't want to come away completely empty-handed because after all that time spent queuing, that would just be ridiculous. And so while I was there, I did pick up a skein of their Peace Fleece yarn, or rather Peace Fleece that is stocked on their stand. This is a yarn that I've heard an awful lot about over the years, but I've never actually had a chance to squish or to knit with. And this is 75% Navajo Rambouillet and 25% mohair. And so it feels similar but not identical to the fibre company Cumbria, which is what I knit my stag head out of, which also is in a very similar colour. Yeah, I like it, what can I say? But it's not particularly rustic to the feel, I would say. It's certainly a little bit more woolly, but I wouldn't go so far as calling it rustic. I think I could wear this against my neck, I reckon. But I think what this needs to be is something very, very textured and very cabled in a hat. Because yeah, it's got to be done, got to be done. So this is, I believe, it is a worsted weight. Let me just see. Yep, it's a worsted weight, and it is their Wild Mustard colourway, which is 732. And yeah, it's just got glorious speckles of orange and yellow and a little bit of green in there too. And again, just clearly I've got a colour palette going on. Given I bought this while I was wearing my stag head sweater and it was the only thing I actually went to the checkout with. I mean, it's fine. I embrace it. It's fine. We've all got our colour preferences. This just happens to be mine. Having mentioned the fact that you get to meet some wonderful people at Rhinebeck in person, one of the people that I was so excited to meet, I did have a chance to squeeze her very briefly on Friday at Indie Untangled, but we had a proper chance to hug and catch up on Saturday, and that was Gabby of the Once Upon a Corgi podcast. Gabby also has some of the most incredible yarns, and one of those I was able to pre-order with her ahead of time and pick up with her from the festival, and that is this just stunningness. So this is her ginger base, which is 75% superwash merino, 20% nylon and 5% gold stellina, so it sparkles in her insufferably damp colourway. And again, it's just so pretty. Look at this little bit of blue-green here. Oh. I've been watching Gabby's podcast for years. I was so excited to meet with her in person. She was exactly as wonderful a human being, if not more, as I thought she would be. And in addition to this glorious, glorious yarn, I was also able to pick up my pre-ordered corgi butt pin. Look at it. Look at how cute it is. With its sparkly knitting ball of yarn. That's the chair, just so we're clear. Because... no. But corgi butts, I mean, if you haven't watched her podcast, you are mental. Go and have a watch, because her corgis are the cutest. Her corgi butt pins are to die for. Her yarns are glorious, and she's lovely. Literally, what are you waiting for? One of the great things about Rhinebeck is the fact that you do have some of the slightly sheepier wools alongside a lot of superwash and a lot of hand dyes. And one booth rather, that I was very keen to check out for the former of these, the slightly woollier variety, was Green Mountain Spinnery. And while there, I picked up these two gorgeous skeins here. So these are both, let me have a look at this here. These are both their Lana, which is a 2-ply fingering weight. And that is 100% fine wool. They are 400 yards. They are fingering, as I mentioned. This colour here is Rosado, and this colour here is Playa. Playa, I know, but I read it as Playa. Together, I mean, they have to be colour work. They could be mittens, they could be a hat. I know they're very similar to some of the colours that I picked up for the Northport hat. And I know I've always said that I don't do pastels, but I reckon that these on my hands could work pretty nicely. I have had the pinwheel mitts from Loop London in my queue for a really long time, and I think these together for that pattern could be really glorious. But again, it's just lovely, lovely yarn. It's got so many beautiful little flecks that are in here. It's not quite tweedy, it doesn't have the nups, but at the same time, there's so much glorious kind of variation in here. I think they're just beautiful together. So yes, Green Mountain Spinnery, really happy to have had a chance to go and to squish some of these. And again, these are not remotely rustic. They are incredibly soft and will wash and bloom even more so. So yeah, really happy with these two. And then almost at the other end of the spectrum, I did try and get into this booth on the first day, but it was so crammed and so crazy that I ended up leaving this purchase until day 2. But I did finally manage to make my way into the Primrose Yarns booth and pick up these two incredible skeins. So both of these are on her Rose base, which is her sport weight. They are 100% superwash merino, and aren't they just so pretty? This yarn here on this side was one that I bought for myself, as well as buying a skein for my lovely friend Meredith, because it's called From London with Love, and how could I not? This just felt so appropriate. So as you can see, gloriously purple, lots and lots and lots of really deep dark tones. I feel like this is a good Halloweeny sort of yarn as well, but really lovely. And then this colorway here is Vertical Horizon, who are a band that I loved in my very late teens, early 20s, and so again I had to pick this up. But look at how pretty. If this isn't like fall in a skein, I don't know what is. It's just russet reds, and look at this little splash here. Again, so pretty. These will go together in something, I don't know what, don't judge me for it, but just, they're so pretty. Clearly I was having a bit of a sort of dark, deep reds, purples sort of thing between this and the lamb strings yarn that I showed you previously from Indie Untangled, but oh, I love it. So soft, so squishy. So there was one other booth that I knew I really wanted to check out at Rhinebeck itself, and that was O Wool. And O Wool is someone I've purchased from previously. I really enjoy their yarns, but I wanted the chance to go and look at them in person and perhaps give one or two of them a squeeze. And they certainly did not disappoint. Now, I bought these on the second day. Arguably, I would have had more success if I'd gone back on the first day, but I think by the end of the first day, I was so overwhelmed and just ready to go and to rest and to enjoy some quiet downtime that this had to wait until day 2. But I'm not too sad about that at all, because the yarn that I picked up was a sweater quantity, because of course it was. And I feel like you're not going to be super surprised by the colour. Because yes, this is their mustard seed colour. It is fairly consistent. It's not particularly tonal. I feel like one of these is looking slightly different on the camera, but they are all the same colour, I can promise you that much, and the same dye lot. This is, as I mentioned, mustard seed. O Wool is a really amazing brand. So they do completely machine washable, certified organic merino. So it is superwash, but my understanding is their the treatment they apply to this is far more is far more environmentally friendly in making it superwash than a lot of the other standards that are out there, and so it's just so incredibly soft. This is their O-Wash fingering base, which, as I mentioned, it is a superwash base. It is 100% merino, and it is 428 yards or 391 meters to the skein. So certainly enough here to make something really rather glorious and textured. Mustard seed is a colour that I've been lusting after for such a long time, but it's incredibly difficult to get hold of on their site, and so I was delighted to have it in person. Would I have been super upset if I ended up with a different base? Probably not. I think fingering was maybe not my first choice, but at the same time, as I mentioned, I went back on day 2. This was the only sweater quantity they had left. I do have some of their sport weight already, and so I wasn't too fussed as to whether it was sport or fingering, but I'm perfectly happy with the fingering, I will say. So yes, in terms of specific patterns, not too sure. I feel maybe there's a glorious pattern, I think it's called Astrantia, which has a very sort of textured yoke, almost in a little kind of star pattern with tiny little bubbles, so that could be a winner. I am quite sure I will find something. There's also a pattern that I've had in my queue for the longest time. This might be one of my longest queued items actually, and that is a pattern. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the designer, but I'll put it here on the screen for you. It's called Seattle Grey, and it is a fingering weight cabled sweater that was replicating a sweater that was worn in a very early episode of Grey's Anatomy. I had a bit of a fleeting fling with Grey's Anatomy back in the day. I really enjoyed it right up until the episode where everyone died in a plane crash. Spoiler alert. And I sort of lost my way with it from their point on. But certainly in those early series, I really enjoyed it. And as I say, there was this one sweater. It was slightly kind of bell sleeved. It had this cable at the front to cinch everything in. There was no shaping that was required because of the giant cable. I really liked it. And there is a pattern for it. It is up on Ravelry. I've just never quite got round to knitting with it yet. I feel like this could be a really interesting option for that. We shall see. And that's essentially it for my purchases at Rhinebeck itself. I do have another couple of bits to show you from the rest of my trip, but I also just wanted to take a minute to say how wonderful it was meeting some of you at the festival itself. Now, I did a fairly good job of telling you I was going to be wearing a bright yellow sweater or a bright coral hat, and you did not disappoint in terms of finding me, saying hello to me, including the one person who literally word for word said, "I love yarn," which is a reference back to my second episode. Thank you so much for doing that. That was perfect. I genuinely, again, I'm not going to rabbit on about this too much, but I'm still coming to terms with the fact that there are quite a lot of people who watch this. And so I'm even more coming to terms with why, because Christ knows why. But I'm really grateful to each and every one of you that came up, that said hi. I'm pretty sure all of you went away with hugs, which is good. But I so enjoyed meeting you there. Now, I am still a very early stage podcaster. I am still terrible at remembering to get photos and consistently take videos and names of people. I do have a couple of people who I remember and whose names I was able to grab, but seeing as I do not have everyone's names, I feel really bad calling you out in particular. Please know that every single one of you, whether we grabbed a photo, whether we didn't, I was so delighted to meet you. And yeah, I just, you're the best. You're the absolute fucking best. Some of you gave me things, and that was deeply unnecessary. I'm incredibly grateful, but deeply unnecessary. But I do want to do just a very quick shout out to those of you and say thank you so much for this. So one of the first people that I met with was outside the Barns, and this is her website is Gage Hill Crafts. She gave me this glorious little, it is an unscented, let me see if I can turn it around so you can see, an unscented lotion bar, which, as someone who was very nearly not let into the US on the basis of having fingers and fingerprints that were too dry to read accurately on the scanner, true story, this is entirely necessary for me. It's the perfect size, it is unscented, and as I say, I really, really appreciate you stopping by and giving me one of these. It was great to meet you. Thank you so much. With Meredith and I going around the venue itself on the first day in our stag head sweaters, mine was obviously the bright obnoxious yellow, hers was in a glorious like burnt orange colour. It's one of the Brooklyn tweed yarns in the shelter base. We met a lady who was incredibly taken with our sweaters and also so kind as to give us both a little collection of these stitch markers. So I'll pop them up here. You can see there's a little dice here as the main stitch marker, and then 4 of these little glorious beads here. Now her Ravelry name is You Name It, and that is you as in the sheep. And she's got on here Chance of Rain as well, so I'm not sure if that is her shop name, but her name is Marnie Schroeder. And Marnie, thank you so much for this. We were both incredibly taken aback to have these, and really delighted to meet you. That's such a sweet gift. I really do appreciate it. I hope you had a wonderful rest of festival. I spent a little bit of the day catching up with friends and seeing folks in their gloriously coloured Ellery sweaters, as I mentioned, and so with that I missed a lot of the time that was spent at the podcaster meetup. The number of people who came up to me and asked me if I was going to be there was delightful, but I will confess my initial response was yes, because I want to see the other podcasters, forgetting that, yeah. That being said, I did make it there towards the end. There were a few people still there and I was delighted to meet with them, so thank you so much if you were there and you said hi. One of the people who I believe was Colour Wheel Yarns, and I'm going to pop her up here. That is Lauren. I want to say Kidaish. If I've butchered that, I'm really sorry. But Lauren was lovely. We had a chance to talk briefly. She gave me this glorious little pin, which I'm incredibly grateful for. She has the Colour Wheel Yarns shop, and that is on Etsy. It is Etsy shop Colour Wheel Yarns, and some glorious colours in there. So thank you so much for this, Lauren. It was so nice to meet you. I also met up with Debbie Jameson and a couple of her friends as well, and so Debbie Jameson is the Loving Path. She has the Loving Path on, we think it is on Etsy, so it's lovingpath.etsy.com. They've come all the way from Canada, and she was so kind as to give me not one but 2 minis. And aren't these just stunningly beautiful? So this bottom one is, again, this is autumn personified in a skein of yarn. I mean, really, come on now. And this top one is just all of the greys and the blues and the purples with a little tiny sprinkling of fall in there too. And it's just, your colours are stunning. Thank you so much for these, Debbie. And these will be making their way into a long and somewhat maligned granny stripe blanket that I haven't touched since much earlier this year, but I'm so excited to put these in there and have them to remind me of a fantastic day and a wonderful time meeting you as well. So thank you so much for these. I really appreciate it. And last but by no means least, there was a podcaster who I've followed for quite some time. She lives in one of the most beautiful and wonderful cities on this earth, and that is Sandy by the Lakeside, who hails from Toronto. Toronto is such a fabulous city. I'm very jealous of both her and Eric and a few other of the podcasters who live there, but Sandy was kind enough to give me this glorious little pin, which is designed after the bags that she makes that are stunning. And it was so fun to meet Sandy in person. Sandy said she had literally decided a couple of nights before Rhinebeck that was it, she was coming, and had driven all the night just to try and get there. And so to see you there was such a surprise. It was so wonderful. And thank you so much for this pin. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I'm not really sure that you'd bought much by the time that I saw you, so I hope you rectified that a little bit as well, because while it is about the people, the buying the stuff is good too. But yeah, it was so nice to meet you in person, so thank you for that, Sandy. But yes, if we met and if we had a chance to hug, I'm so grateful. If we didn't meet and we didn't have a chance to hug, I just hope you had the most amazing time. If there is anyone who I've forgotten, please excuse me. I'm still working my way through my suitcase and unpacking things as I go. If I do come across something again, I will absolutely share it in next week's podcast. But either way, I was so taken aback and delighted to meet so many of you there, and thank you for making me again so very aware that people actually watch this back. And yeah, sorry about that. So as I mentioned, on the Saturday evening of Rhinebeck, we had a chance to pop over to Jill Draper's open studio and squish some of her glorious yarns in person. I did manage to catch some of Jill's yarn at EYF earlier on this year. She was sharing a stand with Daughter of a Shepherd, who is Rachel, who was also at her open studio, and it was lovely to see both her and Rachel Coopy of Coop Knits there too, and just have a chance to squish and to talk to some people from the UK, although I didn't want to monopolise too much of their time, given we do get to spend time on this side of the pond as well. But while I was at the open studio, there were some skeins that were just calling my name, and the first of those, which I would have loved to make a full sweater quantity, but there just weren't quite enough skeins remaining, was this. Because again, I mean, it's the same kind of incredible green that is in that Backyard Fibres that I showed you earlier. But this here, this is her Mohonk Light, which again is 100% lamb's wool in the fingering weight, and it's in her emerald colourway. And this is, again, being lamb's wool, there's no rusticness, there's no kind of extra woolly sensitivity around about my neck there. It's just pure squishy goodness. And this is 550 yards, 503 metres, 4 ounces, which is around 113 grams. And this is probably going to be knit on 2.25 to 3.25 millimetre needles, so 1 to 3 in the US terms. And I reckon this could end up being a cowl, it could end up being a hat, it could end up being a contrast colour to something else entirely. I don't know, but what I do know is I needed it and I wanted it, and I had to buy it. So yes, squish. But I knew I couldn't possibly come away from Jill's open studio without a sweater quantity of yarn, and so this hopped into my bag and had to be brought home with me. This is her Kingston base, and I mean, come on. This is just the most glorious, deep, winey burgundy red, and that's winey without the H, just wine-y red, and it is stunningly beautiful. I mean, come on now. Seriously. This is DK weight. This is 100% Targhee, which is a new to me base. I've never knit with Targhee before. Again, super soft, not something I would call rustic. Maybe I've got a very different definition of rustic, but certainly for me, this has no prickle to it whatsoever. This is just, this would pass for merino. It's all I'm saying. This could pass for merino. So this is 270 yards or 247 metres to 4 ounces or 113 grams. And again, you're looking at US 5 to 7 or 3.75 to 4.5 millimetre needles. So a very, very solid DK weight. And with 5 skeins of DK weight, I reckon I should be able to get a pullover out of this without any problems. There is a little bit of veg matter that's left in there. There's a little bit of hay that you can see just picking up there on the camera. But in all honesty, it's like bubble wrap. I'll just pick it out as I go along and it'll keep me entertained. But yeah, it's so glorious. The colourway, which I forgot to mention, is her Hasbrook Avenue colour. And my pronunciation of that, even without a cold, is going to be questionable. So let me hold it up here so you can say. But yeah, I love it. And as you can see, I've got a little bit of a thing for red sweater quantities. So this will fit in nicely, I am sure. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know if 5 skeins is quite enough for something gloriously cabled, but I feel like this yarn deserves cables. It's got a kind of, I feel like it's got a sort of shelter feel to it without it being shelter. So yeah, we shall see. And so those were my Rhinebeck purchases. So between the heading out there initially, spending some time in Brooklyn, New York, spending a little bit more time up in Indie Untangled, and then the festival weekend itself, it was such an incredible time. So Meredith and I were sharing a house. We were over in Socrates, which is where Indie Untangled was located as well. We'd booked a house, as I mentioned initially, for my 2 other friends to join us, but in the end it just ended up being the 2 of us. That being said, it was quite wonderful in the sense that we were able to have a whole sofa to be able to spread our purchases out on at the end of each and every day. So Max and Sue, you were missed, but maybe, you know, we just need an extra sofa next time. It's fine. So yeah, I would say that Socrates was an excellent place to be based. We were on a little creek, a little backwater, so we had a deck out the back of the house overlooking this glorious creek, and I did actually manage to snap a quick picture of the Rhinebeck giveaway yarn out on their deck there, which I'll pop up here just as a quick reminder, but also just to share a little bit of the kind of tranquility of the place and how lovely and quiet it was. But after a few days there, we had just some lovely times together, just nipped out, grabbed some food on the first night, and the second 2 nights, so both the Saturday and the Sunday, we ended up heading over to some of our friends' houses, or rather some of our friends who were staying in the same house, and had a chance to catch up with them in person. What I will say about Rhinebeck is it is clearly wonderful to go and to meet with people and to spend time with them. You will never have enough time to spend with them, and so being able to grab some time that evening and go over and chat more in person and spend a bit of time with them was fantastic. And to Jen, to Emily, to Vanessa, to Yelena, to Claire, to Jess, and their friend Erin as well, who I met for the very first time. Thank you so much for inviting us both round. Thank you for helping us spend time with you and catching up some more. Thank you for cooking for us on both evenings. That was delightful. And just thank you for inviting us in and spending time together. One thing I will say, and I'd be fine for this not to be repeated, is they did force me to sit with them while they watched episode 4 of the podcast. Which, I mean, I'm genuinely over the moon and delighted for your support. I'm delighted that you enjoy it enough to want to watch it willingly. If you want to do it without me being there next time, that would be fine. Because I just become hugely preoccupied with my intonation and mouth noises and all of these amazing things that hopefully none of you ever notice, but are literally all I can hear when I'm editing this. And so to sit with people and go through it is is quite a feat. But again, you know, you made it very clear how supportive and how much you're enjoying the podcast, so I cannot fault you or be anything other than amazingly grateful for that, so thank you. But after an amazing few days at Rhinebeck, Meredith and I packed our bags up, left mid-morning on the Monday, and headed up for a few days of just calming down, chilling out a little bit, visiting, doing a little bit of leaf peeping in and around New England, which is somewhere I've never been and I've wanted to go for a very long time, and spend some time just travelling around and seeing the sights. And so we spent a couple of nights up in Vermont at a beautiful A-frame cabin, which is the Vermont A-frame, and I will put its details down below in case any of you should plan to visit, because it is stunningly pretty. It is located just outside Manchester in Vermont, which is the most beautiful little town. I kind of fell in love with it a little bit. I did post about it over my Instagram stories, and I might make that into a highlight as well, just so you can share in how stunningly pretty this place was. But it's everything you want in a little quintessential New England town, including 2 yarn shops and a really, really beautiful bookstore. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the day that we were there, both the yarn shops were closed. This is no bad thing. I think we've established that. But any other time, and I'd be delighted to stop in. But no, such a gorgeous little town. From there, we went over to Boston via Salem. We had a day pre-Halloween spent wandering around Salem, which was hilarious and very, very, very fun. We also made it up very briefly to Portsmouth in New Hampshire to meet up with another glorious friend of ours who is Alicia, who wasn't able to make Rhinebeck, but I'm so pleased we were able to enjoy some time together in person and some fantastic dinner. Portsmouth, I feel like Portsmouth in the UK gives Portsmouth in New Hampshire a very bad name. I have nothing against Portsmouth in the UK. It's a lovely city, but probably not quite as quaint and charming as Portsmouth in New Hampshire is. So again, it's a place where I'd love to spend a little bit more time. It seemed so lovely. We got there just as it was getting dark. We could see Maine on the other side of the bridge, which is a state I did not happen to collect this time round, but I will be doing at some point, I am sure. But it was such a gorgeous little place to spend an evening, and so much fun to meet with Alicia in person. And from there, we then headed down to our Airbnb in Boston. It wasn't entirely smooth sailing on this leg. We did end up at a petrol station, gas station, at about 10:30 at night, having just filled our car up with fuel, only to discover that the engine wouldn't turn over. We tried to get a jump, we tried remote start, all of these things, and in the end it just sat. So of course we did what you would do. We called the rental company, they sent out a tow truck, and 2 minutes before the tow truck arrived, we tried it again and it turned over perfectly, because of course it fucking did. It really was a bit of a trying end to an otherwise brilliant evening, but it did mean that a couple of days later we had to spend a little bit of time faffing around with hire cars and trying to get them. We were staying, as I say, down in West Roxbury, which is a suburb of Boston on the sort of southwest side. We did on the Friday have to go all the way back to Boston Logan Airport and switch out our hire cars. That was a little bit trying, I think, for both of us, but at the same time, you know, there's no one I would rather have been stuck in a really shitty hire car with. I like to think that we both bore it pretty well. And so a couple of days spent in Boston, including a Thursday night with a Boston group who we'd had a chance to meet very briefly at Rhinebeck, and as I say, it's a great opportunity to meet with people you will never have long enough to spend with them. And so to meet up with Lauren, with Vicky, with Nishat, with Liz, it was so fun spending the evening with you, enjoying some amazing array of predominantly fried food and some glorious waffles as well. It was so fabulous to meet you all in person again and just get a chance to squish you for a little bit longer. So from Boston, we made our way down on the final night to just outside Reading in Connecticut, and a little boat hole there. We didn't have a chance to visit with people when we were there. I know there were a few people who live nearby, not least of whom is Sue of Legacy Knits and Knit24 over on Instagram. I would so have loved to stop in, but by the time we'd faffed around with our car hire and with an early start for Meredith ahead of her flight the next morning, we just needed to get somewhere to drink some wine and to go and have a nice night's sleep, and that is pretty much exactly what we did. And so first thing on Saturday, it was up very, not even bright and early, pre-bright, super early, to get down in the torrential rain to JFK, which was again not a super fun drive, but we made it and it was all good. And then I had to say bye to Meredith, which was very sad and with lots of squishes, but it was so much fun travelling around and spending time with her. She is the best. The rest of that day, as I've touched on, I spent a little bit of time. I went over into New York and spent some time downtown for a little bit. Again, the weather was appalling. It was proper sideways rain, and the joy of Manhattan is whenever you go onto a different avenue or a different street, the wind will be blowing in a different direction, and so you're never quite sure how to hold your brolly or your hood to avoid getting absolutely pelted with rain. Later on in the day though, as I mentioned, I happened to pop over back to Brooklyn to spend a little bit of time with Kristen of the Woolenvine podcast, and I'm so glad that we had the chance to sit and to catch up. We wandered around Brooklyn General for a good long time, squishing an awful lot of yarn. We may have even purchased some of it. So I talked a little bit earlier about the Woolfolk Snow that I bought in both the silver white colourway and in that glorious golden colourway. I may have purchased a couple of other skeins as well. So between Carleen and Kristen, they both, between them, actually enabled me to wander over to part of the store where they had some Fibre Company yarns on sale. Now, Fibre Company is a yarn I can get here in the UK, but that didn't stop me buying these two bad boys here. So these are both on the Arcadia base, and the Arcadia base is, let me just double check it here. It is 60% wool, 20% alpaca and 20% silk. You can see the little bits of silk noil that are in here as well. It is just glorious. And the colourway is Jack Pine. It is a DK weight yarn. 2 skeins are 50 grams each, and 145 yards, so 133 meters. And the two of them together will of course go to make a hat. Who knows which one? Who knows which pattern? I have no idea, but these were on sale and therefore they had to come home with me. I was also going around and squishing some of the skeins that I recognised having seen some of the names from Indie Untangled, and one of the dyers that I did squish briefly at Indie Untangled but didn't really have an opportunity to look at properly was Yoth Yarns, and thankfully Brooklyn General has a great supply of their yarns there. So I came away with this, and how stunning is this? I don't normally gravitate towards your orange reds. I'm more of a blue red sort of person, but this I had to make an exception for because it's beautiful and it has my hair on it, which pretty much everything in this house does. But look at it, and it does glow in exactly the way that it's coming across here. This is their big sister yarn, which is an 80-10-10 merino cashmere nylon yarn, and it is DK weight, and the colourway is saffron, because of course it is. It's just, I think this is an orange red that works for me. I'm quite happy about it. It is 100 grams or 231 yards, and yeah, I couldn't pass this one up. Now, in theory, this could be a hat, but in practice, I think this is probably going to be the colourwork portion of a yoked sweater. And I'm going to show you the other part of that yoked sweater on next week's podcast, because it was something I made a little cheeky pre-purchase of before I went over to Rhinebeck in the first instance. But I think these two could look rather stellar together, so I'll keep you posted on where I think this is going to end up. So I mentioned that I had the opportunity to meet with Kristen of Villenvine in person, and I don't even know where to start with this woman because she is just incredible and the nicest, and I have been watching her podcast since the dark days of not even watching, of listening, and so to meet up with her and see her in person was just such a delight. She has been hitting it out of the park recently with her colourways, and two of the colourways that really did catch my eye that she posted about recently on her Instagram feed were Pumpkin Kombucha on this side, tremendous name, excellent fall colour, because just look at it, again, not normally one for oranges, but I feel like fall in New England has changed me. I feel like I am now an autumnal colour palette kind of gal. So we've got this, which is on her Nouveau base, which is her superwash merino fingering single ply base, because her colours just glow on this, it's amazing. And then we also have her tremendously named Haunted AF oh dear, on her Nouveau base as well, and again with the glorious oranges all the way through to the fabulous peachy pinks. It's just, so these two together, right, these two together, ugh. And because I can't see two skeins that work really nicely together without needing a third, this happened. Yeah, I mean, so I'm someone who, I've knit a couple of fades, but I feel like for me, like 90% of the fun is just in making fades in the first instance. And this appears to be what I've done here. So again, this is something where you go over to the US and what you do is you buy a skein of yarn that you could buy at home. This is Olan yarns in her singles base, which again, Olan yarns are just, they're stunning. They're absolutely beautiful. Again, merino fingering weight. Just to recap, you've got 400 yards or 365 meters of the Villenvine, and you have, let me just double check, 366 meters, so almost identical yardage on this here. In terms of the weight of the yarns, they're going to go perfectly together. But I can't let a 3-colour fade pass up. Or rather, I can't pass up a 3-colour fade when I see it in a store. It has to happen. And then I went back and I looked at my lamb strings. You can guess what's going to happen next, can't you? Yep. I mean, come on. Come on. So, right, let me just use the boobs as a shelf here. So yeah, it speaks for itself. In terms of options, so there's this option here, or alternatively I could, if I wanted to, just do a little bit of gentle jiggery pokery, so to speak, and pop you there. I could put you in here and switch you two round. and do this. I mean, I feel like my boob shelf is not really doing the sterling job of this, but here we go. So we could do it like that. Oh, for goodness sake. Hang on. Hold the phone. We've got this option here, which is more of a straight gradient all the way through to the orange, which also works. I mean, the options are not endless, but they're considerable. So, yeah. I don't really want to knit on What the Fade, but I have at least 2 combinations in my stash that would allow me to do it. So if you know of any other fingering weight, gradient, fade style pattern suggestions, I would be delighted to hear them, because I couldn't, come on. Seriously though, how could I not? I couldn't. I was powerless. So there you have it. Both you, me, and my long-suffering, slightly grumpy cat, who is currently sat just down here in his little bowl, you will all be delighted to know that we're done. That's it. It's the Rhinebeck recap. It was the most incredible 10 days. And way back at the start of the year, I'd said to myself, and I touched on this in one of my earlier podcasts, I'd said to myself that this was going to be my year of being brave and just going out and really trying to do things for me that I might not otherwise have had an opportunity to do. And through my situation, being where I was and having an opportunity to go out and meet people that I'd only ever spoken to online, never had a chance to meet in person, I'm coming away from the last 10 days just on an absolute high. And it's down to a number of things, right? It's down to having the opportunity to go over there and to meet people in person. Absolutely. It is down to the kindness and the generosity of those people in being so welcoming, in spending time with us, in spending additional time with us, and making time above and beyond to meet up with us wherever they could. And even to those of you who I wasn't able to meet up with separately, just spending time with you on the day and getting a chance to hug you in person was so wonderful. And I'm delighted to have met so many of you. It was amplified even further by this podcast and by meeting with people who I'd never even spoken to before, or at least knowingly. I mean, clearly I am speaking to you, but I wasn't consciously doing that beforehand. And so to have an opportunity to have that dimension added into it, and to meet and to hug with so many of you as well, was amazing. And then added into all of that, the number of people who were following along on social media, who were leaving comments and messages and just genuinely so excited that I was having such an amazing time. I couldn't have asked for anything more. I couldn't have hoped for as much as I've had over the last few days, not just in yarn terms, but also I can't stop gushing about this trip. It's been incredible. And yeah, we need a new drinking game now. This is what someone had mentioned. And what are we going to do once Rhinebeck's over? I mean, the good news is that I've still got Rhinebeck yarn to talk about when I start to knit with it. I'm still going to be talking about that one time at Rhinebeck quite a lot. And I feel like EYF really is only around the corner. And with so many people coming from overseas to EYF this time round, I'm excited about that already. But yes, I can't tell you how grateful I am. I can't express how pleased I am at so many of you enjoying the podcast, following along, wishing me well, and hopefully delighted by some of the haul that I've taken you through today. So as ever, even if you don't have a Rhinebeck stash that you've acquired, even if you are still shopping from stash, or even if you made a couple of sly purchases on the side, I would love it if you were to join us both over in the Knitting Vicariously Ravelry Group, where we have a thread that is about to come to a close, which is Show Us Your October Vicarious Knits. I will be replacing that later on this week with a November thread. I will also be talking next week about a cowl, where we're looking to start taking projects that have been vicarious for far too long and turning those into actual knits in the not too distant future. So please do look out for that next week. But in the meantime, if you wish to knit vicariously, please do feel free to pop your information over in that thread and tell us some of the projects that you want to be knitting on. Please feel free as ever to use the Knitting Vicariously hashtag on Instagram to tag projects that you want to be knitting or are deeply enjoying knitting or are massively coveting, all of the above, and we'd love to catch up and see how you're getting on. But in the meantime, as ever, I hope you have an incredible rest of day, rest of week. I hope all of your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, and if for whatever reason it isn't, I hope you're having a chance to knit vicariously. Keep on, keeping on, squish your skeins, and I will see you again next time. Bye. I'm snotty and brain nothing, blah. Oi. But I wanted to give some specific call outs as my cat decides to let himself out of the door again. Can you close that? Can you get the door? No? Fine, I'll get it. Come on, boob shelf, get it together, get it. Right, this is what cowls are for. Oh yeah. Ho ho, baby. Ow, 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 ow. Rude. Oh, I think I need to go up bigger than a D cup for this. Oh, come on. I mean. There's the thumbnail. Wink and a gun. I mean, I might just wear them like this. I'm kind of on board. I think I've lost one.